Take a look at the image on your screen. This is a painting depicting a lecture from the University of Bologna in Italy, considered the first modern university in existence from around the 1300s. At first glance, there probably isn't too much remarkable about it. Here we have this sage-like professor lecturing to a small classroom full of students. But take a harder look for a moment. How does this class differ from the classes of today, some 700 years later? Sure, the clothes look a little weird, and there's the obvious lack of a PowerPoint presentation that professors are so dependent upon, but other than that, nothing is really all that different. Even the audience bears some striking resemblance to the classrooms of today. Looks like we have a side conversation going on here between bored students. Looks like this guy's trying to copy off his classmates' notes. This guy over here is checking out the cutie sitting next to him, and this guy down here, well, yeah, we've all been this guy at some point in time. The point is, it's been over 700 years and very little has changed in how we teach university students. And the question becomes, maybe we should be rethinking the way we educate our students. This is where the flipped classroom comes in.
Good day, and welcome to this brief video podcast on the flipped classroom. I'm Dr. Stuart Ingalls, and we're going to be spending a lot of time together in the next few months. I thought I'd take a few minutes now to introduce you to an approach to teaching that you are going to become very familiar with, like it or not, over the upcoming summer term, and give you an idea of what to expect. The flipped classroom is an innovative educational paradigm. And that's just a fancy way of saying that it's a new way of thinking about how we actually approach teaching a subject. In a traditional approach, which we typically call didactic teaching, we have a professor standing at the front of the room dictating concepts and facts, and the students in the audience taking careful notes to study from in class. The student then goes home at the end of the day and studies the material independently, trying to make sense of the concepts presented in the class.
Now, this made sense in the medieval classroom. The first universities predated the printing press, so printed books were scarce and incredibly expensive, since they had to be written out by hand. The only way to realistically mass replicate a body of text is demonstrated here. A professor, positioned at the front of the room, dictating from a specific text of knowledge, and each student frantically transcribing what is said word for word. This was complicated by the fact that the text was usually written in Latin rather than the student's native tongue. The professor, as it were, was also not always a content expert, but rather a really good reader of Latin text. Now, it would be a few hundred years before the advent of the printing press, and much longer before the mass production of textbooks, and by that time, this notion of academia and higher learning had been very well established, and there really wasn't a pressing urgency to change it. Even with the introduction of overhead projectors and PowerPoint for projecting images and text, the assumption was still that the student would transcribe what was being projected. Over the past few decades, however, there's been some major advances in technology, and I mean major. Think about some of the brands to emerge in that time. Google in '96, both Wikipedia and iPod in 2001, Facebook in 2004, YouTube 2005, Twitter in 2006, Skype, Snapchat, Instagram, text messaging. The list goes on and on. It's hard to imagine that a little over 10 years ago, tweets referred to nothing more than the noises little birds made, and the term YouTube meant nothing at all.
Let me try to put this into perspective for you. Here are a couple of clips from movies that showcase state-of-the-art technology of the time. First is from a movie called War Games from 1983, and the second is from The Net from 1995.
You're really into computers, huh?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Dialing into the school's computer. They change the password every couple of weeks, but I know where they write it down.
Which side do you want?
Ghost,
the hottest band on the internet.
Okay, so a little dated, I know, but you have to remember, at the time, this was pretty advanced stuff. The net was released during my first year of undergrad, and I remember thinking, man, I wish I had a computer that could do all that stuff. You can stop laughing now.
The point is that these recent advances provide us with the opportunity to rethink the way we teach and explore other approaches that were not possible before. This is where the flipped classroom comes into play. The concept of the flipped classroom was first developed in the 1990s, then popularized by Salman Khan, a hedge fund analyst turned YouTube tutor who later founded the Khan Academy, which produces online instructional videos similar to what you will be working with in this course. Okay, so what is a flipped classroom? Well, let's start by taking a look at a traditional university course, which can very generally be divided into two distinct components. In the classroom session, students listen to the professor explain important concepts and take down notes that can be referred back to later. This is called a didactic lecture style. Following class, students work independently or in small self-organized study groups to review the lecture material and try to make sense of the concepts. Many professors will provide guidance in the form of homework questions, but for the most part, the learning is pretty much self-directed. So here's where the flipped classroom differs. As the name implies, we flip the setting in which these two components occur. Instead of coming to class to listen to a live lecture, students watch the lecture in advance of the class in the form of pre-recorded video podcasts, textbook readings, or other methods assigned by the professor. In the classroom session, students work on specific problems developed by the professor and assigned groups, with the professor present to provide clarification and answer any questions that students might have. To demonstrate the advantages of a flipped classroom design, let's consider a hypothetical situation. Here we have 4 separate students attending a traditional didactic lecture. On the far left we have Lori. Lori is presently bored out of her skull. She took the same class as an undergrad with an exceptional professor who explained everything clearly in intricate detail. She has a strong mastery of the material, but still attends classes because occasionally the professor will emphasize a point not covered in her undergrad class. Mostly, however, she is able to anticipate everything the professor says and wishes he would go at a quicker pace. To Lori's right is Allie. Now, unlike Lori, Allie has never taken the course before and struggles with the concepts. She tries to keep up with the pace of the lecture, but it always seems that about 10 minutes in, she gets hung up on a key concept and loses track of what the professor is saying. By the time the class ends, she feels bogged down and will need to spend several hours trying to work on the material on her own. When the course started, Lori tried to help Allie out by explaining confusing concepts during the lecture, but neither were able to keep up with the professor, and students around them kept giving them dirty looks because of the distraction this created. Next, we have Whitney. Whitney seems relaxed and fully engaged, focusing intently on her computer screen. Well, that's because Whitney is presently checking her Facebook account and hasn't taken in a word the professor has said for the last 10 minutes. Whitney has, however, clicked like on her BFF's photo of the killer creme brulee she had at a new coffee shop, and will soon click on a post with the subcaption, "You won't believe what happened next," because, well, clickbait. Jenna? Well, Jenna's not even attempting to hide her disinterest. She finds the seats in the lecture hall uncomfortable and can't sit up straight for long periods of time without her back hurting. To make matters worse, Jenna has a notoriously short attention span, and the class takes place in mid-afternoon, at a time when Jenna always tends to feel tired. 20 minutes in, and Jenna is typically fast asleep with her head on the desk. So how does all this change in the flipped classroom design? Remember, lectures are now available as video podcasts that students can download or access through YouTube. This means that students can view the lecture material whenever and wherever they choose. Rather than having students come to the lecture at a set time and location, the lecture comes to the students at a time and place that is convenient for the student. Students can do lectures in the comfort of their own homes, sitting in their favorite chair, in their pajamas if they want to, or on their cell phones at the gym or on the bus. Another big advantage is the ability to pause the recording whenever you wish to take a break. In a traditional lecture, if you need to leave to use the bathroom or zone out for a minute, you miss out on what the professor was saying. With the video podcast, you can pause the recording at any time, get up, use the bathroom, answer the phone, grab a snack, take a nap, so forth. and the recording is there waiting for you when you're ready to come back to it. This is an advantage to even the most focused students. While typical university lectures are scheduled to run for an hour, educational research has established that the average person's attention span is no more than 15 minutes. This means that even the best students will lose their focus at some points during a lecture. The distractions provided by social media don't help either. By dividing the typical lecture up into much shorter 15-minute segments, the lessons become more manageable for the students to cover. Another advantage, at least for those that download the videos, is the ability to view the material at one's own pace. Most media players are equipped with a playback speed option. Students who are already comfortable with or are reviewing the lecture content can speed up the video to watch it in a fraction of the time. Students who are not familiar with the material can slow the playback speed or regularly pause the video to reflect on what was just said without worrying about missing the next point. This affords time to consult a textbook, surf the net, or pose questions to classmates for clarification of confusing concepts. With a single click, students can backtrack and re-watch segments if they missed a point or wanted to confirm what was said. Now, granted, the average time spent listening to a lecture from start to finish tends to increase substantially, but the bottom line is that rather than just writing the information down without actually thinking about it in the moment, students are able to make notes and process the information at the same time. Now, be honest with yourselves. How many times did you spend an entire class session taking notes, got to the end of class, and found you didn't actually understand any of the ideas the professor was trying to communicate? Considering the amount of time spent going back over notes and trying to tie in to the PowerPoint slides and remembering exactly what it was the professor was saying, combining lecture with the assimilation of knowledge is much more efficient in the long run. Let's check in with our 4 students to see how they're doing with the video podcasts. Here we see Lori taking it a bit easy, having a snack, and watching epic fail videos on YouTube. This is because Lori decided to race through the lecture at double speed and is now taking a break. She finds she is able to stay on top of the material just fine at the faster speed and pauses on the rare occasions that the professor mentions a new concept so that she can write down what was discussed. Overall, though, she enjoys getting through the material in less time. Allie is still working away on the material. She usually takes twice the allotted time to finish watching lectures, but that's because she is constantly pausing and taking careful notes on what is being said. She also frequently skips back and rewatches short segments to help her understand what the professor is talking about. It requires a greater time commitment, but by moving at a slower pace, Allie has a much stronger understanding of the lecture material and was able to follow along with everything the professor was saying. As is usually the case, she and Lori are working together in a private study room at the library, where they can talk at normal volume without bothering anyone. When Allie struggles with a concept, she pauses the recording and asks Lori for clarification. Allie is grateful to get assistance from somebody who understands the material as well as Lori does, and Lori enjoys explaining the concepts, finding it helps her to understand the material at a deeper level. Here's Jenna again. Jenna is at home, sitting back on her couch and wearing comfortable study sweats, her favorite coffee cup in her hands. Jenna is a bit of a night owl and finds that she's most productive in the evening, so that's when she decides to watch the videos. She finds she is able to focus longer, sitting back on her couch and in comfortable clothes. Having said that, Jenna still has a limited attention span, but will frequently pause the video and get up and grab a snack or check her Facebook anytime that she finds her mind starting to wander. And Whitney. Well, Whitney's on the phone. She was watching the podcast, but got a tweet from her BFF announcing that she just got engaged. Hashtag OMG. Whitney picked up the phone and got through to her friend and is now hearing all the details about how it happened, where he had taken her, what she was wearing. You get the idea. The important point here is that after she gets off the phone and retweets the post, Whitney will be able to return to the podcast and pick up right from where she left off. Next, we'll look at the advantages of the actual classroom setting. Because students have already watched the video lecture that contained all the pertinent information that the professor wanted the students to know, the classroom session can now be dedicated to the application of that knowledge. This typically takes the form of homework type problems that the students work through in groups. This is called active learning. Students are presented with the problem that requires solving and uses the available resources to come to an answer. The key difference from traditional didactic lectures is that the flow of information is now multidirectional. The professor will still impart some additional knowledge upon the students, but this constitutes only a small fraction of the classroom time compared to being the exclusive focus of the traditional setting. There is now time for students to ask for clarification of ideas or to apply concepts to more abstract ideas. In a traditional didactic lecture, this arrangement would be a disaster. The instructor would never be able to cover all the material. In the flipped classroom, however, students are afforded the time to delve deeper into the material, having already seen the lecture, and these interactions now contribute to the educational experience of others rather than taking away from them. Moreover, the majority of questions are typically not even directed towards the professor. In most instances, students work together to solve problems, with the professor hovering around serving primarily as a facilitator to the discussions. The result is a greater level of student engagement. Students are encouraged to contribute their own thoughts and ideas. There is this constant switch between input and output and give and take of knowledge. As a result, students tend to be able to maintain focus for longer periods of time without losing interest in the content matter. Also keep in mind that because the important background information is provided in the podcast, the students have already successfully covered all of the learning objectives for the day before class even starts. This creates a much more relaxing learning environment in which the professor never has to worry about increasing his tempo to get through all the material he needs to cover, and students never need to feel rushed for time. Let's return to our 4 students in the redesigned active learning classroom. With all the conversation and discussion happening around them, Allie and Lori feel much more comfortable discussing the material with one another. While the flow of knowledge heavily favors passing from Lori to Allie, there are a number of situations in which Allie has been able to contribute either with her own understanding or by challenging Lori with the question that really requires Lori to think. Right now the discussion has become quite animated and has drawn Whitney's attention away from an important survey to determine which house she would belong to if she was accepted into Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, to contribute her own knowledge of the material to the discussion. However, the group has reached a dead end with the discussion and are unsure how to proceed. Jenna decides it's time to call the professor over to clarify some confusion that the group members are experiencing and provide some guidance on which direction their discussion should take.
Okay, so I've just spent the past several minutes trying to sell you on the concept of a flipped classroom, and hopefully it worked, at least to a certain extent. I'm sure many of you are still skeptical about this approach, which is fair. Everyone has different learning styles, and some people just prefer the good old-fashioned didactic lecture. I've been doing this for a few years now, however, and I can tell you that the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. And I'm still fine-tuning the approach based on feedback from those that weren't as big on the flipped classroom. So hopefully you're at least curious to see how all this works and willing to keep an open mind moving into the summer. So let me take a few minutes to show you how all of this actually works.
The 407 course will have somewhere around 30 separate class sessions where new content will be introduced. For each class, there will be a pre-class and an in-class phase. The pre-class phase will involve the video podcast to walk you through the course content. This takes the place of traditional lectures. The content is typically broken up into 2 or 3 15-minute videos, which encourages frequent student breaks in order to help maintain attention. The in-class phase will begin with a graded quiz to gauge understanding of the pre-class material, as well as to give incentive to complete the lesson in advance. I'll then take some time to address student questions about the material and go over the more difficult concepts. The majority of the class time will be spent doing what I refer to as facilitated active learning exercises. Now, originally I thought of calling these facilitated active integrative learning exercises, but thought that might set the wrong tone. These involve students working within their dissection groups to solve a series of application questions using student response technology. For this reason, every student needs to have an active Top Hat account for this course. So what does a video podcast look like? Pretty easy question to answer, actually, because for the past several minutes you've been watching one. I created a PowerPoint to discuss a flipped classroom with you and have been running the presentation using voice recording software. The presentation is scripted so that selected images appear at the precise moment I wish to discuss them. I'm able to control the appearance of text and labels. I can highlight structures of importance, even draw annotations on top of the image to assist with the discussion. I can even use a digital laser pointer to draw your attention to different areas of the screen. It's really not much different than the class lectures you're used to. The presentation itself is available for you to download either as the original PowerPoint or as a PDF file. You can print these off or work with them directly on your computer, depending on your personal preference. Note that a number of notes following the lecture have already been added to the notes section of each slide to cut down on the need for note-taking during the presentation. You are, however, strongly encouraged to modify these notes during the presentation. You can add additional information or your own thoughts or ideas, or you can change the existing text to personalize it to something more meaningful and easy to remember. This is much easier to do from the original PowerPoint file, but if you prefer a printed version, you can make additions in different colored ink just as easy. Again, I can't stress enough the importance of this part of the process. A lot of educational research has demonstrated that taking personalized notes is very beneficial for learning and retention. A few other things to make you aware of. First, all the images used in this presentation are either part of the Creative Commons, which means that permission is given by the creator to openly use the resource, are part of the public domain, meaning that their copyright has expired, or falls under the fair use doctrine. This makes it possible to post these videos to open access platforms, such as YouTube, without violating copyright law, making it easier for students to access the material. Each video and presentation is in itself part of the Creative Commons, which means that permission is given by the creator to openly use this resource, licensed through the Creative Commons, meaning that you are free to download, share, and redistribute without the need of express permission to do so. The screen you are looking at right now appears at the end of all video podcasts you'll be watching for the course. I also want to take a moment to discuss some of the other resources available to you to assist in this class. First, all the notes included in the PowerPoint are also available as fully editable text documents for those that prefer reading the material without the distraction of images. Second, many of the lectures have optional kinesthetic learning exercises, or KLEs, which are supplemental videos available for download or streaming. These videos record me as I draw anatomical structures into place on a skeletal template that is available for student download. Students can print off the template and follow along by drawing the structures as they appear on the screen. The important point to make is that these resources are all redundant to each other. They present the same information just in different ways. The reason for all these approaches is to present the same information in a variety of ways that appeal to different learning styles. These are broadly labeled using the VARK classification system, which is an acronym for visual, oral, read-write, and kinesthetic learning styles. The podcast caters to the visual and oral learners and is strongly recommended for all students, as this is the most complete source of testable material. The notes and reference textbook readings are strictly for those that learn from reading and jotting down important information. And the KLE exercises are meant for those that prefer a hands-on approach to learning. You can actually Google VARK and access a website that allows you to complete a free questionnaire which can provide insight into your personal learning style and give suggestions on how to approach your studies to maximize your retention in this and other classes. Let's take a closer look at the in-class phase, in particular the facilitated active learning sessions. Each session contains a series of challenging questions, often in the form of clinical vignettes. After the scenario is presented, the response can be divided into 5 phases. First, a question is posed to the class and each student uses their computer or smartphone to respond independently based on what they think is the correct response. At this point, there is no discussion. Students answer the question as if they were taking a test. Once the students' responses are tabulated, the response frequencies are shown, which allows everyone to see what the class as a whole is thinking about the response. In phase 3, question is asked for a second time. But this time around, students discuss the possible answers in their lab groups and bounce off ideas from one another. Everyone still answers independently, but now with the benefit of peer discussion of the scenario. At this time, instructors will circulate through the room to provide guidance and clarify issues. After students have responded for a second time, the revised response frequencies are considered, and finally, the correct answer is revealed. This is followed by the 5th and final phase, where students offer the rationale for their answers and further follow-up questions can be posed. Once everyone is satisfied with the discussion, the group moves on to the next clinical vignette, and the process continues until the class reaches an end. An important point to make is that while correct answers on the readiness assessment quiz taken at the start of class count towards the final grade in the course, the accuracy of responses on the FAL questions do not. This serves as an opportunity to challenge your knowledge without penalty.
So that's about it, at least until we meet again at the end of May. If you like, you can bookmark this page or subscribe to the YouTube channel. Over the next several weeks, you'll see the site populated with the video podcasts for the summer course. You're welcome to start watching them in advance if you want to get a jump on the material. Each video will be prefaced with the ANA407 course code to help you find it on the page. Next in the series will be a general review of basic anatomical principles, just as a refresher. Once we get all the technical material out of the way, now that's when the real fun begins. So until next time, this has been Dr. Stuart Ingalls. Enjoy the rest of your day.